I came for just a few days, but she made me stay longer than I ever planned, and I couldn't bring myself to leave. I hadn't meant to stay long. Just a few days away from the city, a brief escape from the routine of work and endless responsibilities. The coastal town was quiet, almost sleepy, with narrow streets that curved toward the sea, and I thought the trip would be nothing more than a pause. But the moment I stepped into her home, I realized I had misjudged what was waiting for me. She was standing near the doorway, sunlight filtering through the lace curtains and painting soft patterns across the wooden floor. She looked up as I entered, and something in the tilt of her head made me stop for a heartbeat. She was in her early 40s, but her presence carried a timeless grace, the kind that didn't demand attention but inevitably commanded it. Her hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, catching the light in a way that made me notice every subtle movement. The scent of her perfume was faint, floral, yet comforting, lingering like a soft promise in the air. "Welcome," she said, her voice warm but measured, like she was extending a hand not only to me but to the quiet potential of the moments we were about to share. She smiled, and it wasn't the quick, polite smile of a stranger, it was genuine, gentle, almost careful, as if she were inviting me to notice her world without rushing. I followed her into the living room, and my eyes lingered on the small details of her space, the worn books stacked neatly by the window, the soft throw draped over the arm of the couch, the way sunlight glinted off the delicate porcelain teacups on the shelf. It all felt intimate, alive. She moved with fluidity, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, then reaching out to offer me a cup of tea. Our hands met for a moment, brief, almost accidental, but long enough that I felt a small, electric tingle run up my arm. We settled into the living room, and for a while, silence filled the space, punctuated only by the faint creak of the floorboards as she adjusted her seat. Her eyes met mine, and I sensed a subtle curiosity there, an unspoken question that mirrored my own. There was a quiet steadiness in her gaze, something that made it hard to look away, and I felt the unexpected warmth of connection even before a word was spoken. Every movement she made seemed deliberate yet effortless. The brush of her hand against the armrest as she leaned forward, the slight tilt of her shoulder as she laughed at something trivial, all these small gestures drew me in. I realized that this wasn't just a visit. This was the beginning of something that demanded attention, that required me to slow down, to notice, to feel. And in that moment, as the light shifted and the quiet hum of the town outside settled in, I understood that my plan to leave in a few days was already beginning to feel impossibly short. There was a gravity to her presence, a subtle insistence that I stay a little longer, if only to see what might unfold in the spaces between words, glances, and the gentle brush of hands. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the room in amber hues, I knew with quiet certainty that this was no ordinary encounter, and that my short visit might last far longer than I had ever intended. The next morning, the sunlight came through the windows with a soft insistence, spilling gold across the kitchen tiles. I had expected the routine of breakfast to be ordinary, but the way she moved through her space made everything feel deliberate and alive. She hummed quietly as she arranged the ingredients, her fingers brushing the counter lightly, and I found myself noticing the small grace in her gestures. "You take the eggs?" she asked, her tone casual, yet there was a quiet warmth that made the ordinary question feel more like an invitation than a chore. I handed her the carton, and our hands met briefly. Just a touch, nothing more, but it lingered in my mind long after the contact ended. I caught myself stealing glances at her, the curve of her neck as she tilted her head, the way her hair caught the light in gentle waves, and the faint creases at the corner of her eyes that appeared when she smiled. There was comfort in her presence, but also a strange, magnetic pull I hadn't expected to feel. We moved through the morning together like a quiet, unspoken dance. She showed me how she liked her toast, and I noticed how her eyes softened whenever she explained something, as if she wanted me to feel included in her world. At one point, our shoulders brushed while reaching for the same utensil, and I felt a jolt of awareness, an almost imperceptible electricity that made me acutely conscious of the space between us. Later, we took a walk along the narrow streets of the town. The air was salty and fresh, carrying the distant calls of gulls and the soft rhythm of waves against the shore. She talked about her favorite spots, her voice weaving stories with an effortless charm that made me feel as if I were discovering the town through her eyes. Every so often, our hands would touch briefly as we adjusted our pace, and each fleeting contact made the world feel slightly sharper, more vivid. I began to notice the subtler aspects of her presence, the way she tilted her head when listening, the quiet attentiveness in her gaze, and the small, almost imperceptible gestures that revealed her personality, brushing hair from her face, tucking a strand behind her ear, or laughing softly at something only she seemed to notice. She was confident, yet there was a vulnerability beneath the surface, something that made me want to be present, to pay attention, to understand. By mid-afternoon, I realized I was losing track of time. Simple things, like the way she sipped her coffee, the warmth of the sunlight on our backs, the gentle rhythm of our steps together, had become mesmerizing. I noticed the contrast between her calm, assured demeanor and the flutter of something unspoken in her eyes when they met mine. Every glance, every brush of her hand, every shared smile made my original plan to leave in a few days feel increasingly impossible. Evening came, and we returned home quietly, lingering over tea and casual conversation. I caught myself wishing the moments could stretch indefinitely, savoring the subtle, tactile intimacy of sitting close enough to feel her warmth without crossing any boundary. There was no rush, no grand declarations, only the quiet, growing sense that our connection was becoming something neither of us had planned but both were beginning to feel deeply. By the time night fell, I knew this was no ordinary friendship. She had a way of drawing me in, of making the simplest shared moments feel significant, and I realized with a mixture of anticipation and hesitation that my stay might last far longer than I had ever intended. That evening, the sky was a muted canvas of pinks and purples, the kind of fading light that seems to make time stretch and soften. We had settled near the window, the faint scent of the sea drifting in, and for a moment, words felt unnecessary. The room was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves outside and the soft ticking of the clock. I realized how acutely I was aware of her presence, the subtle ways she moved, the rhythm of her breathing, the quiet grace in every gesture. She spoke first, almost hesitantly, about the things she rarely shared with anyone. A past loss, a dream that had slipped through her fingers, the loneliness that sometimes came even amidst company. Her voice was steady, yet there was a vulnerability beneath it, a delicate, trembling edge that made me lean a little closer without realizing it. She rested her shoulder near mine, not fully touching, yet close enough that I felt the warmth radiating from her body. I found myself listening more than speaking, drawn to her words and the honesty behind them. There was something magnetic about the way she allowed herself to be seen, unguarded yet composed. My mind wandered to the fleeting touches of our hands earlier that day, the brush of fingers passing a cup, the faint grazing of shoulders as we walked. Those small moments suddenly felt laden with meaning, underscoring the quiet intimacy we were building without needing to say anything aloud. She laughed softly at a memory from years ago, and I noticed the crease of her eyes, the subtle lift of her lips, the warmth that seemed to radiate around her. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the unspoken gap between us, but hesitation held me back. There was a delicate balance to this connection, fragile, tentative, and immensely compelling. I sensed that one wrong move could shatter the quiet trust forming between us, yet doing nothing felt impossible too. At some point, she shifted slightly, and our arms brushed ever so lightly. My pulse quickened at the contact, a reminder of the unspoken tension between us. Her hand hovered near mine, a fleeting, unconscious gesture that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. There was no rush, no overt display, only the understated power of presence and touch, of two people sitting close enough to feel each other's warmth and hear the silent rhythm of shared breath. I wanted to tell her how extraordinary it felt to simply be near her, how her openness made me feel trusted and, strangely, safe. But words faltered. Instead, I let the silence carry our connection, aware that in these unspoken moments, more was communicated than any conversation could capture. As darkness settled outside, the world beyond the window seemed to disappear. All that existed was her, the soft light around her, the subtle intimacy of shared space, and the growing awareness that this was no ordinary encounter. For the first time, I understood the true weight of staying longer than planned. It wasn't the days that mattered, but the depth of the bond quietly forming between us, fragile and profound, and entirely impossible to ignore. By the time night fully descended, I knew that my brief visit had already begun to feel permanent, not because of obligation, but because of the quiet, undeniable pull of her presence, and the unspoken trust that was slowly, irresistibly growing between us. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The room was bathed in a soft, diffused light, and the quiet hum of the town outside drifted in through the open window. I sat on the edge of the bed, my thoughts tangled with a realization I couldn't ignore. I didn't want to leave. Not yet. And yet, the rational part of me whispered caution, the age difference, the fleeting nature of my original visit, the invisible walls society might raise between us. I watched her move about the house with that effortless grace that made every ordinary task seem poetic. She hummed a tune I didn't recognize, bending to adjust a curtain or straighten a cushion. The small, unconscious touches she made, the tilt of her shoulder, the sweep of hair from her face, lingered in my mind like a private memory. I wanted to reach out, to tell her everything I was feeling, but words felt inadequate, fragile, almost clumsy in the face of the subtle intimacy we had built. We spent the morning preparing lunch together, moving side by side in the kitchen. Our hands brushed against one another more often than before, while reaching for the same knife, passing a dish, or leaning to check on something simmering on the stove. Each contact was electric yet fleeting, a quiet reminder of the tension that neither of us dared to name aloud. I felt a pull toward her, an invisible gravity I couldn't resist, but I also felt the weight of hesitation pressing on me, reminding me of the boundaries I was wary of crossing. I noticed the way she glanced at me occasionally, almost as if she were measuring my thoughts, trying to gauge my hesitation. Her eyes held warmth, curiosity, and something unspoken, a subtle question I couldn't quite answer for myself. Did she feel it too, or was it only my own heart betraying me? I found myself pausing, studying her, letting the silence between us stretch just long enough for the unspoken understanding to settle. Every movement, every glance, every accidental touch seemed magnified in the quiet intimacy of the day. The warmth of her presence made my chest ache in a way I hadn't expected, while my mind wrestled with self-doubt and uncertainty. I realized that the age difference wasn't just a number, it was a weight of expectations, of social norms, of my own insecurities. Yet none of that mattered when I was near her. When our shoulders brushed, when our laughter mingled, when she rested her hand lightly on the edge of mine, it felt impossibly right. By afternoon, the tension had built quietly but insistently. I caught myself lingering in small moments, standing near her as she arranged flowers on the table, listening to the faint brush of her fingers against petals, pausing beside her as we stepped onto the balcony, the breeze lifting her hair and sending a shiver through me. I wanted to speak, to reveal the conflict swirling inside me, but I stayed silent, savoring the intimacy of presence and the delicate dance of hesitation between us. That evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the room, I realized something undeniable. Leaving now would feel impossible. Yet staying meant confronting fears, doubts, and uncertainties I had never faced before. And somewhere, deep inside, I knew that whatever decision came next, it would change everything. My short visit had already grown into something far more complicated, far more profound, and I wasn't sure I wanted to return to the simpler world I had left behind. The storm had arrived unexpectedly that night, the rain thrumming against the windows like a persistent heartbeat. Inside, the house felt cocooned from the world, the room dim except for the soft glow of a single lamp. We sat together near the window, a blanket draped over our laps, and for a long while, words felt unnecessary. The rhythm of the rain, the muted light, and the quiet closeness between us carried a language all its own. I noticed how her shoulder brushed mine when she shifted, the warmth radiating from her body a quiet reassurance. Every glance she cast my way lingered, holding more than just observation, a subtle acknowledgement of the unspoken connection that had been growing for days. Her eyes, reflective in the soft lamplight, held a tenderness that both unsettled and comforted me. I realized then that I was no longer an observer of her world, I was entwined in it, caught in a delicate orbit I didn't want to escape. She spoke softly, almost hesitant, sharing a thought she had been holding back. "I didn't expect you to stay this long," she admitted, the vulnerability in her voice surprising me more than any confession could. There was a pause, a delicate silence that stretched between us, filled with the weight of unsaid emotions. I wanted to respond, to tell her the truth, that leaving now would feel impossible, but the words stuck, fragile and inadequate. Instead, I let my presence speak for me. I inched a little closer, letting the warmth of my body press subtly against hers. She didn't move away. Her hand brushed against mine as if by accident, lingering just long enough to ignite the quiet electricity that had been building between us. The subtle intimacy of that moment, no words, no grand gestures, only the shared warmth and the unspoken acknowledgement, was more powerful than anything I could articulate. I realized then that we were both dancing around the same truth, that our connection was deeper than mere attraction, that it had grown into something that neither of us had planned, but both felt urgently. There was a magnetic pull in the way she looked at me, a delicate combination of curiosity, restraint, and desire that mirrored my own feelings. Her hand, resting lightly near mine, seemed to say what neither of us could voice, a quiet, mutual recognition of the bond forming between us. As the storm outside continued its rhythm, I felt a sense of profound clarity. The hesitation, the doubts, the fear of social judgment, none of it mattered when I was near her. Every glance, every brush of skin, every shared breath seemed amplified in the dim, intimate space of the room. I understood then that staying longer wasn't a choice I was making, it was something my heart had already decided. By the time the rain softened into a gentle drizzle, a quiet calm had settled between us. She rested her head briefly against my shoulder, her hair brushing my chest, and I wrapped an arm lightly around her back, savoring the steady warmth and the subtle weight of trust. It was a silent confession of the feelings we both harbored, a recognition that our connection had grown into something rare and unspoken, yet undeniably real. In that small, storm-lit room, the slow burn of our relationship reached its first peak. And in the quiet, intimate moments that followed, I knew that nothing could return me to the simple plans I had once held. She had made me stay, not by force, but by the undeniable gravity of connection, warmth, and the quiet power of shared vulnerability. The morning after the storm felt unusually quiet, the world outside still damp with the remnants of rain. Light streamed softly through the windows, painting the room in muted golds and grays. I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in days, the kind that comes when a decision, long avoided, finally becomes undeniable. I didn't want to leave. Not now. Not ever, if it meant losing the subtle, profound intimacy that had grown between us. She was in the kitchen, her hair slightly damp from the morning mist, humming a tune that I couldn't place but found soothing. I watched her for a moment, marveling at the ease with which she moved, a quiet confidence shaped by years, yet softened by a warmth that made her approachable, human, and irresistible all at once. The way her fingers brushed lightly against the counter, the tilt of her head as she glanced my way, even the faint smile playing on her lips, all of it drew me closer. I felt a magnetic pull I could no longer resist. I joined her, and the simple act of sharing the kitchen felt like a profound affirmation of our connection. As we moved side by side, our hands brushed occasionally, lingering just enough to send subtle jolts of awareness through me. There was no urgency, no need to speak, the physical closeness itself was a declaration, a silent acknowledgement that we were no longer just visitors in each other's worlds, but participants in a shared, unfolding story. Later, we stepped outside into the garden, the earth still soft from the rain. I reached for her hand instinctively, and she interlaced her fingers with mine without hesitation. The warmth of her skin, the gentle firmness of her grip, the subtle squeeze that mirrored my own longing, it all communicated what words could not. The breeze lifted her hair slightly, and I found myself mesmerized by the effortless grace of her movements, the way she seemed to belong to this space as naturally as she belonged to this moment with me. We walked slowly among the flowers, the petals damp and fragrant, the air rich with the scent of wet earth and blossoms. I felt a quiet exhilaration in simply being near her, in letting go of the hesitation that had kept me tethered to my original plans. The age difference, the fleeting nature of my visit, the shadow of doubt that had lingered, none of it mattered anymore. All that mattered was the connection, tangible and alive, that had grown between us. By afternoon, I knew my decision was no longer a choice but a natural extension of our bond. Sitting together under the soft canopy of leaves, sharing quiet conversation and the occasional laugh, I felt a profound sense of belonging. She rested her hand lightly on mine as we talked, a simple gesture that carried trust, affection, and an unspoken promise. I realized that staying wasn't about abandoning the outside world. It was about embracing the emotional reality we had created, fragile yet undeniable. As evening approached, the room bathed in amber light, I felt a deep contentment. The hesitation, the doubts, the fear of stepping into the unknown, all of it had been replaced by certainty. I wanted to be here, with her, in these moments that stretched into hours and days. The slow burn of our connection had reached a point where every glance, every touch, every shared silence affirmed that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Choosing to stay wasn't just a decision, it was an embrace of the intimacy, warmth, and subtle romance that had quietly taken root between us. And in that embrace, I knew the days ahead would be filled with the gentle thrill of shared presence, unspoken desire, and the extraordinary comfort of being truly seen. The morning was calm, almost impossibly serene. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting soft streaks across the wooden floor. There was a quietness in the house, a gentle stillness that made every small sound, the creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of the kettle, feel intimate, almost sacred. I realized that in all the days I had spent here, this morning was unlike any other. There was no urgency, no rush to leave, only the quiet presence of her, and the realization that our bond had settled into something lasting. We shared coffee at the small table near the window. The steam curled lazily from our mugs, carrying the rich scent of warmth and comfort. I watched her as she lifted her cup, the sun catching the subtle highlights in her hair, the crease of her smile softening her features in a way that made my chest tighten. There was an effortless beauty in her, a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention but naturally drew it, and I felt profoundly grateful to simply be there, sharing the moment. Our conversation was light, filled with small jokes and quiet observations, but beneath it ran the steady undercurrent of unspoken understanding. She brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her hand lingering near mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I didn't move it away. Instead, I let the warmth of her fingers brush mine, a silent affirmation of the connection we had nurtured. It was intimate without being bold, a simple gesture loaded with the weight of trust and affection. As the morning stretched, the inevitability of departure loomed in my mind. Yet, when I looked at her, I knew leaving wouldn't feel like an end but a continuation of the bond we had formed. We had created something rare, a slow-burn connection that transcended days, distance, and even societal expectations. It was a relationship built on mutual respect, quiet desire, and a deep understanding that had grown naturally, patiently, and profoundly. When the moment to say goodbye arrived, it was tender, deliberate, and fully human. I lingered in the doorway, feeling the warmth of her hand on my cheek, the subtle pressure of her palm against mine. Her eyes held all the words she couldn't speak: care, longing, trust, and the soft promise of continued connection. I leaned into the touch, letting it anchor me in the reality of what we had shared. The hug that followed was slow, unhurried, the kind that allows you to memorize the contours of another person without ever needing words. I felt the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against my chest, the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders, and I realized that these moments, small, fleeting, yet profound, were what made the stay longer than I had ever intended feel absolutely necessary. Even as I stepped outside, the warmth of her presence lingered, a quiet echo in the spaces I left behind. I knew that our story wasn't defined by the days I had stayed, but by the emotional depth we had cultivated, the trust, the subtle intimacy, the shared laughter, the quiet glances, and the moments of vulnerability that had created a bond neither time nor distance could diminish. I walked away with a sense of completeness, carrying the memory of her hand in mine, the soft tilt of her smile, and the undeniable truth that she had made me stay, not through force, but through the effortless, magnetic pull of connection, warmth, and the extraordinary comfort of being truly seen. And in that, I found a quiet happiness, a lasting sense that our hearts had already chosen to remain intertwined, long after my visit had ended.